Matter is everything around us, and it comes in many different forms, each with its own special qualities. It's important to know that matter has properties we can measure, and these properties help us figure out what things are made of, how they work, and how we can use them. By looking at and measuring these properties, we can learn more about how matter acts and changes. We can also see patterns, things that happen over and over again, which help us group materials and predict how they will behave. In this lesson, we will look at 4 main properties of matter: temperature, mass, magnetism, and whether something sinks or floats. These are all things we can see, touch, or measure, and they help us understand how matter works and how it affects other things. Let's start with temperature. Temperature tells us how hot or cold something is. Everything, like the air we breathe and the water we drink, has a temperature. We measure temperature using a thermometer, which shows us how hot or cold something is in degrees. When something gets warmer, like when we heat water on the stove, its temperature goes up. As the water heats up, it can change from a liquid to a gas, which is called evaporation. This shows us cause and effect. When the temperature rises, the water changes. Temperature helps us figure out how things will react when they get hot or cold. Another important property is mass. Mass is how much matter is in something, and we usually measure it in grams or kilograms using a balance or scale. Mass is not the same as weight, which can change depending on where you are. For example, a rock will have the same mass whether it is on Earth, the Moon, or floating in space. This shows how mass stays the same even when things change around it. Knowing the mass of something helps us understand what it's made of and what we can use it for. For example, heavy materials like iron are good for building strong structures, while lighter materials like plastic are used for things that need to be easy to carry. Next, let's talk about magnetism. Some materials, like iron, nickel, and cobalt, are magnetic, meaning they can stick to magnets or become magnets themselves. Magnets are used in many ways, from holding things in the fridge to helping machines work. By testing if something is magnetic, we can figure out if it's magnetic or not. Magnetism is important in science and industry, where it's used to move things and make electricity. Compasses, which help us find our way, also use magnetism because they point to Earth's magnetic field. This is an example of how structure and function work together. Magnetic materials have a special structure that makes them work with magnets. Finally, we have the ability to sink or float, which is called buoyancy. When we put something in water, it will either float on top or sink to the bottom. Whether something sinks or floats depends on its density or how tightly packed the matter is inside it. If something is less dense than water, like a piece of wood, it will float. But if it's denser, like a rock, it will sink. This is another example of cause and effect. The density of the object affects whether it sinks or floats. By testing this, we can learn more about the object's density and how it's built. Buoyancy is especially important when building boats and submarines, where we need to balance weight and flotation to keep them above water. In summary, the physical properties of matter, temperature, mass, magnetism, and the ability to sink or float, are all things we can measure and study. These properties help us see patterns and understand the cause and effect relationships that explain how matter behaves. By testing and measuring these properties, we can learn about different types of matter, predict how they will act, and figure out how to use them. Whether we're heating something to see how its temperature changes, measuring its mass, testing if it's magnetic, or seeing if it floats, we are using science to learn more about the world around us.